Welcome to Under God Project. We are not in the house. In fact, we are in our guest's home today. And so things are a little awkward, but I appreciate y'all bearing with us. So let's get started. Welcome to Under God Project podcast. Together we accelerate America to be one nation under God again. June is a big month throughout American history. And we've already talked about in our last podcast, we talked about the formation of our nation through a particular family, the Lees of Virginia, and that was very exciting because it all kind of coincides together. Today, in the month of June is the same month that the Constitutional Convention was created for the forming of the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. And so it stands to reason that we will interview the somebody that I look up to as an expert on the Constitution. So I want to introduce our guest today. He's been a friend of the podcast before, Don Fotheringham. He's a Bronze Star recipient for his heroism at Iwo Jima. So obviously fought in World War II. He's a friend of the podcast, and he's an author of the book, The President Makers. Let me flip this over here. You can see it. The President Makers, How Billionaires Control U.S. and Foreign Policy. So there are few that are such experts on runaway governments and corruption in the government, etc. He's been a staunch defender of the Constitution since all of his life, and we're honored to be in his home today. They've opened up their home so that we can have this discussion about preserving the Constitution. So, Don, welcome to the podcast again.
Thank you, Andy.
You are welcome.
Glad to be with you again.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. So Don has a very interesting perspective that I wanted to bring out. Again, like we said, he's a World War II veteran, a decorated World War II veteran, Bronze Star at Iwo Jima, wrote the book on big government, and has a very interesting perspective on Article 5 and Article 5 conventions. And so we wanted to talk about that. We've talked about it so much. Don and I have been talking about it for a very long time, and I'm very excited to be able to chat with him and kind of start from the beginning. And that's honestly the hard part, is to kind of rewind the conversations and bring everybody up to it. So let's start with Don. What are with just a simple question, what is your thought about Article 5 and its purpose?
Article 5 was put in the Constitution because our founding fathers were great, humble men. They had just put together a form of government that was unique in the United States, and they were sure they had made mistakes. Article 5 was a means by which they could quickly correct those mistakes on a constitutional basis.
Okay, and there are movements today about how we use Article 5, right? There are particular movements about Article 5 conventions. What's your thought about an Article 5 convention?
I think it would be a big mistake at this point in our history. Ever since the founding of the country, there have been many proposals by states, which requires 2/3 of them to institute it, to get it going. And all of those proposed conventions have failed. In other words, they never came to pass, right, for the very simple reason that the organizers realized there's no way to limit it. You could put delegates in a convention, and in that convention, the delegates would have government-making power, a tremendous amount of authority that the people who created our country had in the beginning. And for that reason, there has never been an Article 5 convention.
Right. So for over 200 years, there's been, we've known about Article 5. It's not like it's new, right? So Article 5 has been in the Constitution since its beginning. And it was, James Madison and George Mason kind of were on two sides of it. So the idea of an Article 5 convention really goes as far back right to our founding, right to the center arguments between particularly those two men. But we also see kind of how Richard Henry Lee and Francis Lightfoot Lee kind of took two sides to the core of like where the government lies, a strong central government versus families and individuals controlling the government. So it's a very interesting perspective, Don. Now, you've had some history with this as well, haven't you?
I have. I've been working with it for many years. As a matter of fact, in 1983, I was very much surprised to hear that we were only 2 states away from solidifying the call for a constitutional convention.
Really?
Article 5 convention, yeah. I didn't know it. It wasn't a big issue. It was just kind of casually brought up. And I thought, hey, wait just a minute. We've got a problem here.
Yeah, oh my goodness.
Yeah, so I went to work immediately. I had a few friends working with me. And there were many chapter leaders of the John Birch Society around the country who were also concerned. So they arranged for me to go from one state to the next to testify at legislative hearings against the calling of a convention under Article 5.
So you said you were able to sit with legislature or with legislatures,
state legislators,
right, across the nation to be able to say to challenge the idea of the applications. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, not only the idea, but regardless of the idea, because a convention is idealist. In other words, you cannot confine it to an idea or an ideal or a subject.
Correct. So the convention, Article 5, it doesn't matter what side of the fence you're on. If it's called, it's called.
Yes.
Right? Okay.
Yes.
So it's not there for just the conservative movement or people who love the Constitution. It can also be there if the population and the legislatures are on the complete opposite side, and they want to destroy the Constitution. So they could call a convention because the legislatures decided they want to call the convention.
Yes.
Okay. That's very interesting. So, and what were those efforts like? Was it successful? Was it where did it end?
The 2 calls that we had in 1983 were managed to roll back quite far. I think we got it down to about 10 at one point.
Oh, wow.
By working in 2 directions. The first thing we had to do is call any new calls. That was our number 1 effort. And the second thing we had to do was rescind those calls that were on the books.
So the first thing you had to do was call any new calls?
What we had to do was prohibit any new calls.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
Okay.
And the second thing we had to do was reverse or rescind those existing calls.
Oh,
we had to build a safety margin in there.
Right. Okay. So the first thing you had to do is prohibit the new ones, any new ones from coming in, and then request rescission for the
ones that exist.
For the ones that exist. Yeah.
Right.
We're getting into the mechanics of how it works, so it might be wise for us to talk about what Article 5 says and what it does. I wish I had graphics. I don't. And one of the reasons why I wanted to have this conversation is, Don has been doing this for a very, very long time. Are you affiliated with any organization right now?
I'm in 2 organizations.
Okay.
I'm a member of the John Birch Society. I'm a life member of the John Birch Society. And I'm a member of the Freedom First Society.
Got it.
2 very similar organizations.
Got it. Okay. So let's get into some. Here we go. Let's get into what the Article 5 states. So it says the Congress, whenever 2/3 of both houses shall deem it necessary, shall propose amendments to the Constitution, or the application of the legislatures of 2/3 of several states. So that's the part right there, right? So the application of the legislatures of 2/3 of several states. So right now the number that would be necessary is 34. Okay? Shall be valid for proposing amendments. shall call a convention for proposing amendments, which in either case shall be valid to all intents and purposes as a part of this Constitution. When ratified by the legislatures of 3/4 of the several states, or by conventions in 3/4 thereof, so in the states, as one or the other mode of ratification may be proposed by the Congress. Now here's some additional language. Some of this is not relevant anymore because there's a time constraint on it. Provided that no amendment may be made prior to the year 1808 shall in any manner affect the first and the fourth classes of the ninth section of the first of the article, and that no state without consent shall be deprived of its equal suffrage in the state. So I wish I had a graphic, guys. It's probably easier to see it that way, but we don't have that today. There's a lot in the way that works. So Don, would you like to explain how any of those mechanics work?
Yes, I think if Article 5 were written today, they would leave those last paragraphs off. They would realize that you cannot limit a convention. You can only call it. Even though the language of Article 5, the concluding language indicates that conditions exist. They do not. And the reason they don't, and it's not easily understood by most people, and especially by those who are both promoting a convention and many who are opposing a convention, don't understand the principle of the power of people. The United States is not a country formed by another country. The United States is a country formed by the citizens, by the people within the country. It is not the result of any formal legislative activity. The people themselves form a convention, and they are the supreme authority of that country.
So that's really, I think that's uberly important here, because what you're saying is once a convention is called, all other structures of the Constitution are put on hold. Is that right?
They yield to the convention. Absolutely.
Okay. So that's something it's extremely important to be able to say, like, okay, regardless of how we try to control what happens inside of there, whatever happens, whatever is the product of that is the new Constitution, the new doctrine, etc. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, and as you've indicated, that is not well understood. That is not well understood by the states. State legislators are in a habit of passing laws, and when they pass those laws, they put conditions on it. They put methods of enforcement, punishment, rewards, and so forth, which a convention, which a Article 5 cannot do. Because once Article 5 releases that to the convention is superior to the state.
So that's really interesting. I had done a bunch of research to prepare for this conversation, and I had noticed on whatever website that is pro-convention or whatever, there's a lot of states that will put inside of their own state legislatures controls for an Article 5 convention.
Yes.
And at first it's like, oh, this is a great idea, because whether we get sucked into it or whether we want to do it, let's at least prepare our state so that we can do a few things. One, control a delegate, right? And you see those in there, controls on delegates. And then also, what is the process for a secondary ratification process? So as we read in Article 5, Congress determines whether the applying body, whether the state legislature that said, hey, here we want this amendment, we want this convention, whether they get to be the ratifying body, or whether somebody inside of their own state is the ratifying body. So Congress gets to choose the ratification method, if I have that correct.
Yes.
And so states have, some states, very few, have legislation that determine how, if Congress does the second choice, this is what we're going to do, right? So let's dive into a little bit of that. We were at dinner last night. I thought I was really prepared, and I sat down with you, and you just completely blew my mind. I was like, okay, well, what did I research all this for?
I need to apologize.
No, you're fine. Don't, no, it's fine. So let's talk about the first one, is the controlling of a delegate. Can a state control their delegate?
Not once that gavel goes down in the convention.
Okay.
They can control the delegate up to that point. They can send their delegates to Chicago or New York, wherever they don't hold the convention. But once the convention convenes,
Starts.
and the gavel goes down and the chairman takes over, the state is out of the picture. The state has no authority over what that convention says, does, thinks, or concludes.
Okay, that's significant in my mind. Okay, so once that convention begins, the delegates have supreme authority, and they are. And I think you said it well last night. You said while at dinner that the delegates are more supreme than the governments they represent. Is that correct?
Precisely, yes.
Okay.
You see, the state government, even though the Constitution provides for 2/3 of the states to institute the process,
Right.
that is the only power they have. 2/3 of them can get it started.
Okay.
Once that's started, the states are out of the picture. Why? Because the state is the product of a convention. Every state had a convention to draw up their own state constitution and establish their state, and that state is the product of a convention. It's not the other way around.
That's very interesting. It coincides. It really does give a much greater responsibility to being a citizen.
Yes.
We really do. What is ultimately being concluded here is that it is the citizen that is truly stepping into James Madison's position.
Absolutely.
Right? And being able to say, okay, well, yeah, this is it. And so it's not a legislative activity.
It's not a legislative process.
Right.
Legislative process ends when the convention begins.
Okay.
The convention creates legislatures and legislators. It creates governmental systems. The systems don't create the convention.
Okay, so once the convention begins, the convention is in session. All other restrictions, constitutional structures, executive branch, judicial branch, etc., those are put on hold.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so there's no
other authority.
Right. There's no other. So if they come out with something that was not constitutional from the first Constitution, would the Supreme Court have a role in enforcing any of that? If within the convention they said we don't have a Supreme Court as the product of the convention itself. Am I correct in understanding that?
Well, you're correct in saying that none of the three branches, either executive, legislative, or judicial, have any authority once that convention is in process.
Okay. Very, very interesting. I'm just looking over my notes. So tell us a little bit about interacting with legislators. What were some of the assumptions or paradigms that they had that needed to be changed?
Well, for the most difficult part, and I shouldn't say difficult, I should be happy that most of the state legislators who are organized and work with other states to get them to call a convention are some of the best people the best guys in the legislature.
Well, yeah.
They're the good guys, really. And so I find myself in a position of opposing the good guys.
Well, exactly. Well, I just wanted to chime in just for a quick second, because that is somewhat of the awkwardness of this type of conversation, because those that are promoting a convention, they love the Constitution.
Yes.
They absolutely loved it. There's no doubt.
And it's in the Constitution. They think, well, I'm in obedience to the Constitution. I'm conforming to and implementing Article 5.
Exactly, and that's one of the reasons why I think when we look at one of the problems that I have. This is the reason why I wanted to talk to a person about it who's had some history with it, rather than just put up the videos of one or the other, because it's almost like there's this on the the conservative side of the movement, or the right movement, or the constitutional movement, or whatever. There seems to be camps, for or against.
Yeah.
And one of the first things when you run into a lot of the arguments is that they need to shut down the other side's conversation. And that makes it very difficult to see, okay, I don't know, maybe it's the systems architect in me, but just to say, okay, I need to understand what the process is, so that I know, am I taking the right vehicle over the right mountain, right? Am I taking a tricycle to a NASCAR event, or am I really prepared to do what it is I'm looking to do? Is this tool the right thing to get the right results I'm looking for? And so trying to understand, the history is really good, but also trying to understand the mechanics of what Article 5 really is intended for, what it means, what it opens up, what it does, what its restrictions really are, really helps out a lot. Then we can add, is this the appropriate thing to do, whether we want a balanced budget or limited governments or term limits? Is this the right vehicle for those issues? Before we get into the issues, and before we start saying, yes, I want those things, let's understand what we're about to do,
yes,
and then determine if this is the right vehicle for it.
Yes.
One of the things that crosses my mind is the particular issue at hand, regardless of what they are, and there will be new issues that come up all throughout throughout the generations. One of the things that comes to my mind is the issue bigger than what the Constitution has been able to already resolve? So without an Article 5 convention, we have been able to put 27 amendments into the Constitution. So without a convention, we've been able to, abolish slavery, recognize that clarify the right to vote for every person, regardless of sex or religion or creed, or race. Clarify that more specifically. We've been able to solve all of those major problems.
To get the women's vote.
Right.
Yes.
We've been able to solve all of those major problems without a convention.
Right.
We've bled and died for some of them. I think it's very interesting when we look at pre-Civil War. We didn't have a convention then.
No.
And we didn't even have one post-Civil War during the during the Reconstruction period.
Yeah. Those are excellent points. Those crucial issues, those major issues that were resolved without a convention, proves that the organizers looked into the power of Article 5 and the supreme authority of the people, and decided it would not be a good idea. Even putting good people in there, because that doesn't mean that they wouldn't have ideas that are contrary to the constitutional limitations and the power of the people, the freedom of the people. There'd be a very, very good chance we'd lose that freedom in a convention.
It's really fascinating, because again, is the tool the right tool for the job, right? So
it's the right tool for the job they created it for. The job they created it for is, we obviously are not perfect. We obviously have made mistakes. Article 5 will be here so we can fix them very quickly.
I think it's you mentioned this, and some of the things that we got into as we've been talking for a long time, Don, so I'm trying to catch up the audience to where we've been. But what the framers of the Constitution, what type of men were these? Were these really? Did they think they had it all figured out, or were these men of God that really sought after? Talk to us a little bit about the humility of the men that created it.
Well, in the first place, we know that they did not feel overly confident in what they had created. Otherwise, they would have left Article 5 out. They wouldn't have included it in the Constitution.
Right.
So
right.
This was the escape route had they made any major mistakes. That's what the Article 5 is for. That's what it was put in the Constitution for. What we found, and it didn't take too long to discover, that our founding fathers were the greatest, most true, most trusted citizens on the face of the earth. They recognized their freedom, came to this land where they could originate everything from A to Z, where there's no government whatsoever, and where they could overcome the handicaps of freedom that they had had in England and France and Germany, places that they came from. So the U.S. was a very special place for them, and the Constitution was written in such a way as to implement all the freedom that a person could exercise without harming anyone else.
Right. So the amount of humility, because they just created the Declaration of Independence. They were running under the Articles of Confederation. Richard Henry Lee was the president of the Continental Congress at the time, and so he was kind of the first president of the United States after independence. But again, we did not have a president of the United States until we created a convention, created the Constitution, created 3 different branches of government, and then created the position that George Washington would fill, and rightfully so. So therefore, I see a lot of the argument for, and sometimes even against it, but definitely for it, seems very legislative oriented. We want something specific, so let's have a convention for it. Yeah. It seems that the issue that trigger is bigger than the issue at hand. At least that's the way that I see it right now.
Yes, I would agree with that. Yes.
How do you feel about it?
I think the Constitution is the most inspired document written in the last 2 centuries, or since its founding. And the reason we know that is because our freedom has been so extraordinary. Everybody wants to come to America. The criminals now are sneaking in the open border.
Right.
Everybody wants to be here, and they want to be here because we're free. And there hasn't been any proposed amendment to the Constitution, at least not lately, that would increase that freedom. The Constitution is written in such a way that it limits the government to specific spheres of activity and prohibits it from anything else.
So, I had a question, and then I thought of something else. I apologize.
Okay.
So the Constitution, as the governing document of our nation, limits the government in what fundamentally, and I think that's just the thing that's the constant reminder is, for a citizen truly to be free, they must see the Constitution as not permissions that they are allowed to do, but restrictions on what the government is allowed to do.
Precisely.
Right.
Yes.
And when we truly understand that as deep as the Founding Fathers did, then we'll really see what the purpose of the Article 5 is, which
Yes.
is
Not only we see what the purpose of Article 5 is, but we will also suddenly awaken to hundreds of agencies and operations of our federal government for which it has no authority whatsoever. These are today's problems.
Right.
Today's greatest problems are unconstitutional departments, agencies, activities of the federal government that it has no business being engaged in.
You know, it's. I'd like to get into the issues in just a few minutes, but this might be just a really natural way of doing it. But those agencies. So let me ask one. This was the question I keep forgetting to ask. Does Article 5 then relinquish a citizen's responsibility over our own representation in Congress? Does it say, hey, you don't have to be responsible for your own congressman?
Well, that would depend on what an Article 5 convention concluded.
Okay.
But since we haven't had one,
Right.
and since there's been no conclusion, we have to trust the Constitution we have and the authority that our legislators have.
Right. It's interesting because as I kind of think about a constitutional convention, and again, those that are very interested in it, we're all coming from the same place. We're all trying to preserve. We're all trying to preserve our nation and the Constitution and the freedom that it recognizes and the restrictions that it puts on government. But we still have, in my mind, a responsibility of our own representation. Yes. You still have to control your own congressman. If you don't like him, the first line of defense should be to say, call your congressman, and whether it's your congressman or your senator, to say, get in, activate yourself with them. If you don't even know who they are, then it's not likely that you'll be able to activate them and they'll be able to protect the Constitution by itself. Is that right?
That is correct. The biggest difficulty there is that they only get one letter, and when they either mine or yours.
Yeah.
And when they only get one letter, they toss it in the trash.
Yeah.
I'm not under any pressure to act on this, whether they agree with or believe in the principle or not.
Right.
Now, that's what organizations do, and I really have to give the John Birch Society a tremendous amount of credit.
Oh, good.
When they write a letter, thousands of letters go in.
Oh, wow. Okay.
The whole organization has this topic, and they don't give them a form letter. It's not a form letter, and it's not a resolution that everybody signs.
Right.
Individual, homemade letters with lots of misspelled words. And in fact, I've told that to people from time to time. Don't be afraid to misspell a few words. It has to come from the people.
Right.
And when you do, you get action.
Excellent.
Yeah.
So there are still ways that we can, even in groups.
We have to be in groups.
Right.
Or at least we have to be in concert with each other, whether we're organized or not. We have to have enough people willing to sit down and write a letter in their own words about what Congress ought to be doing, and when they get enough mail, they act.
Well, exactly. There's a lot of interstate organizations that we can associate with or activate into national societies that we can associate with.
Yes.
When we look at the arguments for there's lots of different ways that we can activate and stay active and can continue to have our voice heard. Okay, so that's okay. So the Constitution and an Article 5. So an Article 5 convention, once it's convened, it suspends pretty much all of the other structures inside of the Constitution until the product of that convention is executed.
Well, I'd say that's a little bit of an overstatement.
Good.
Yeah,
Thank you.
That's an overstatement.
Because that was scary.
No, you don't have to worry about that, because Article 5, if a convention were convened, they wouldn't erase the board. They would simply pick up on, at least with honorable people there, they would pick up where we left off on our freedom.
Okay.
They would increase our freedoms.
Okay. So a lot of the Article 5 issues that are presented, and as we look at the different types of Article 5 issues that are requested or admitted, or applications for the issues for those, would you like to get into those today?
If you would like to, sure.
So if an Article 5 convention is, because we were talking about this at dinner last night, and I think that it goes right back to the history of our founding. There's a few things out there right now that Article 5 conventions are applied for, right?
Right.
They are a balanced budget, having a balanced budget amendment, having a term limits, and then federal
limitations on the federal government.
There you go. Yeah. And how long have these issues been? Were these the issues that were around in the 80s when you were active then as well?
No, these issues developed over a period of time.
Okay.
The instigators or the promoters of the CONCON, we call it a convention, we call it CONCON, realized that they needed a little more power in their resolutions and their efforts.
Right.
And that's when they brought up these specific things. They didn't come up initially, but about, I would say somewhere in the 1980s, maybe the 1990s, they started it with these issues like term limits. The big mistake they made there, and continue to make, is the fact that most people don't realize the United States had term limits, and it didn't work.
We had term limits at some point.
Right,
and it didn't
we
work.
had term limits initially. The first, I think, was 7 or 8 years after the Declaration of Independence.
So this is under the Articles of Confederation.
Under the Articles of Confederation, we had term limits. And the reason they didn't work is because it provided an excuse for corruption. If a legislator could only serve for 2 years, he would confine his corruption to his last year in office, steal whatever he can, do whatever he can, defraud in whatever direction he chooses, and he doesn't have to worry about it because he doesn't have to worry about getting reelected. The way it is now, we have to worry about getting reelected. And I think that's a wonderful principle. A legislator or a political official, elected official, should have a good reputation and be reelected on that basis. Whereas when we had term limits, since they could not run for office again, they had nothing to lose by being known as a crook.
Okay.
And nobody's going to vote for them anyway.
They're done. Right?
Yeah, they're done. So that's the big argument, the big thing against term limits. Yeah. Balanced budget amendment is a little bit different, but the fact is that the Constitution of the United States enumerates the powers of the federal government, right?
Right.
They're listed there. And if all of those powers are adhered to, there will be no unbalanced budget.
That's very interesting.
Yeah.
So if we're actually using the Constitution if we're using the government the way that the Constitution already outlines, then there's really not a way to unbalance the budget. That's a very interesting thing. Yeah.
Then another point here too. When our country began, our founding fathers weren't exactly the Rockefeller billionaires of the world.
Well, yeah.
And we had to borrow. Our country, we had to borrow money to get America started.
Right.
And I agree with maintaining that latitude, that prerogative, at least. Yeah.
That there are times where you need to
borrow. We need to borrow.
Right. It's interesting. There's, as I've been looking at different representatives that say different things publicly about balanced budget amendments, etc. One of the things that's brought up is and it's in the conservative movement. Thomas Massey from Kentucky, he'll say, well, that's interesting because the any exception that you put in your balanced budget amendment then becomes permanent, it's at risk for becoming permanent to the rest of the Constitution. So, for example, if you put in an exception for times of war, then aren't we encouraged and incentivized to just always stay at war, right? Or in states of emergency, where we currently have like 34 states of emergency. So we will always be in a state of emergency because Congress, if nothing else, is incentivized to spend money. So they'll just pick an emergency and then keep it there, and you'll just unbalance. Now you'll just create a permanent exception inside of that.
Precisely.
As much as it's really annoying to watch my congressman continually vote for an unbalanced budget, it just invokes that, say, like, well, you know what? Maybe I should activate a little bit more. Maybe I should call him up a little bit more, do more things to say, Congressman, don't blow up my Constitution. Please balance the budget. We were able to do that under Newt Gingrich in the 90s, while Bill Clinton was the president of the United States at the time, and we had a red legislature. So, red Congress. So, why do we have to? Why do we have to use this particular tool to make this happen? So
once you institute a congressional procedure, it can be continued for good or evil. And
that's exactly
so that's just my comment.
No, that's exactly what is concerning. One of the concerns that I have with it as well is that, again, Article 5 is agnostic to our ideals. It's a mode. It's a tool, right? And it can go one way or the other. And so if, Article 5 is called for reasons that we don't agree with, then those reasons could be made permanent. And so it's agnostic to the sides that we're on. But understanding the tool, I think, helps us to understand what issues we want to put inside of that tool. We were speaking the other day, we were talking about how sometimes legislatures can look at Article 5 as a legislative process rather than really what it's designed for. It's not new law. Is that correct?
It is not a process. It is not a legislative process. It's a people process. Legislature has absolutely nothing to do about it. It doesn't mean that they can't determine the mode of ratification or things that are specific there. But it's not a lawmaking process. It's the people deciding what they want and what they don't want. And if we had the same kind of people we had in 1787, we wouldn't worry about it.
That's true. Very true. I think that's one of the things that, when I first was introduced to an Article 5 convention, I was excited about it. I was like, wow, this is, of course, why wouldn't we do this? This is a really great idea. It's another way that we can go through it. But as I've studied it, and as I've looked at it, a lot of new questions have come up in my mind and have said, I feel like I've understood it a lot more. And I don't see that the issues that we want to have them at, I don't see that that's the process. I mean, I recognize that Article 5 is there, and it's there for lots of reasons, but we're really putting a lot of trust in the delegates that we present to these conventions. We put them in the position that James Madison is in, that John Adams is in, that George Mason is in, that we want to look for those types. And we want to have a reason. We want to have those reasons that go well beyond slavery, well beyond women's right to vote, well beyond all the other reasons why we have the amendments in order to create that. And so just having a deeper understanding of what Article 5 is and what it's for doesn't say we will never have one. Right? It's not saying that we will never have one.
No one's ever tried to nullify Article 5. It's never been proposed to be removed from the Constitution.
Right, exactly.
And I commend you for that insight that you just recited. It's wonderful.
Oh, thank you. So, but I think to really look at what the tools that we currently have to see, okay, where in the Constitution do we have the ability to resolve some of these issues, right? So we talked about balanced budgets, we talked about term limits,
The other one is the federal overreach, federal regulatory overreach. What's your thought on all those things? I mean,
it is so simple. It's almost whenever I make this statement, if I'm giving a talk or something, people smile. The simple answer is repeal every unconstitutional measure that has been imposed on our federal government.
Beautiful.
Just repeal them.
We have the power of impeachment and repealing.
Absolutely. And we can just put politicians in a position of, if I don't do this, I'm not going to get reelected. They like reelection. They kind of go for that.
Yeah, exactly. They like to spend our money, and so therefore they need to be reelected to do so.
That's about right, yeah. But all of the problems, not all the problems, I'd say 75-80% of America's problems today are unconstitutional activities of the federal government.
It's interesting. We were looking at Article 3 yesterday at dinner, and we were looking at how the Congress actually has the ability to limit the courts into their federal jurisdictions.
Right.
And that's right inside of Article 3.
Right.
And so, as I'm on a journey to understand the Constitution more and more, I start looking at it going, yeah, like, guys, we have a massive trigger. We have this kind of this nuclear bomb that we could set off on our own Constitution. But keep in mind that that Article 5 is for changing the Constitution. It's not for changing the senators that you have. It's not for changing the legislature.
Precisely.
It's not for changing the people in the legislature.
That's right.
It's for changing the actual Constitution.
That's right.
And understanding its mechanics gives great weight, should give great weight to the soul if you have a love for the Constitution, about how divine it is and how much it recognizes God-given rights that were already there. And so it should not be something that's run into lightly. I don't want to say I'm disappointed, because that wouldn't be accurate, but I'm concerned that a lot of the applications that are put there are there to send a message. And when I hear that language, for a convention, I'm like, well, so is an email, so is a lot of emails like that. That's a message. This isn't.
Yeah.
Now, on the other hand, to give it credit, on the other hand, all of the amendments started, or at least had many applications that were Article 5 convention applications. I have one. Well, the one I have here is actually from Kentucky in the late 70s, promoting the right to life. And as much as I agree with that, and I'm sure that would be great, when in the 20s there were Article 5 convention applications, and what happened was Congress pretty much just got the message, and they recognized that the states were going to make this decision if they didn't make this decision, and so they had their own, and that is what instigated them once it got to a certain point. And so that's when the right to vote was clarified to all sex and gender and race and nationality, etc. So the right to vote was protected. So women's right to vote, and it was because the applications got to a certain point that they said, hey, let's do this. So it doesn't always start there.
Yeah.
And so on one hand, it's like I understand. I'm surprised that we would do it only to send a message. But on the other hand, that's almost what gets their. That's sometimes what gets their attention, even though it's a really big thing to do. So, try not to talk out of both sides of my mouth, but I'm just trying to understand.
I understand what you're saying.
Right.
Frankly, I that was not the way to do it. The Congress recognized that. They were going to be probably forced into a procedure or laws that they wouldn't have any say-so on. They wouldn't have any
Right.
contribution on.
Right.
So they said, well, we'll hurry up and pass this so that they won't have to worry about a convention or something maybe that we're not going to agree with.
Right.
And there's nothing wrong with that, except that the people could have done it without threatening a convention, simply by maintaining their communication with Congress.
Mm-hmm.
That it was obviously the majority of the people that wanted
Yeah.
it.
You're right.
So they had nothing to worry about as far as their political future is concerned.
Exactly. So there's a lot of different ways to go. There's a lot of different ways to go about voicing the people. An Article 5 convention application is one way, but it's a pretty it comes with a lot, right?
Yeah, that would be risky.
Risky way.
I really would hate to think that would become a normal procedure. Most of we have 27 amendments of the Constitution, right? And most of them are pretty good. We agree with almost everything that's in there.
Mm-hmm.
So we can't complain about that. But they should, in my opinion at least, they should have been initiated by public pressure rather than the fear of a con-con.
Rather than fear of a constitutional convention or of an Article 5 convention.
Mm-hmm.
Let's go back for a second to the power of the delegate, right? And I think that's where the weight for me is heavy, but at the same time really inspiring, right?
Right.
So I think that's the thing that Article 5 teaches me about the power that we have to create our government. Now, I think you've very eloquently said it. Government doesn't create government, right? People create government,
right?
And the power of the delegate. Once that delegate is chosen, right, that delegate becomes completely is disconnected from the government that sent it. Is that correct?
Well,
how would you
that's
put it?
his choice. He has the option of overcoming bad laws, instituting new laws, repealing any part of the Constitution.
Mm-hmm.
So it could go either way. It could be either for good or bad.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm glad Article 5 is there. I think Article 5 is a very educational tool because over the years, people have lost the concept of people prominence. They've lost that concept.
Mm-hmm.
Government has passed a lot of laws, pushed them around a lot, moved them in directions they didn't want to go,
Mm-hmm.
and most people don't know what to do about that. They just kind of go along with it as if government had those powers. So I think Article 5 is a good thing because it informs the people that they are superior to government, that the people are the creators of government, and that how can I put it? And that government does not create government.
That's the thing that I think and that's the thing that Article 5 reminds me of, is that Article 5 reminds me that it is families, it is individuals, it is families that create nations, right? And this is one of the things that our biggest tenet is that God makes families, families make nations. Nations don't make nations.
Right.
And that shows that our responsibility is to understand, first of all, what our rights, which are responsibilities, what our rights, responsibilities, what our powers are, and really what that power is to create a nation.
Yes.
Yesterday we premiered it, but last week we were just chatting with a direct descendant of the Lees of Virginia, and how powerful it was that we went from no nation to an independent country right, of United States in less than 30 days from the Lee Resolution to voting on the Lee Resolution, and then 2 days later signing the Declaration of Independence in less than 30 days, because of strong families, the Lees, the Washingtons, the Adams, the Jeffersons. These were families that had wealth, had prominence, had everything in the world, could have sat back in the comforts of tyranny, right, and said, well, hey, it's not me that's getting, I mean, I'm wealthy, it's not me that's really being bothered by it too much. But they knew and they understood the depth of what their individual inalienable rights were, and saw those as responsibilities, and saw those tools and created tools that we use today.
There was a major religious factor in there too, in their beliefs. Most people believe, and I believe, that God raised up our founding fathers for the purpose of creating this country. We're a God-chosen people, and we need to really be humble over that fact. And that's why we have freedom. That's why we have such a great country, and that's why everybody in the world wants to be here.
I think that's exactly what Article 5 reminds me of, is that it is a reminder to me that we are the ones that are absolutely responsible for what happens in our government. We're the ones that are accountable to it, accountable to God to it. And so, using the right tool for the right reason at the right time is very important. And I think that many in our well, I don't know. Maybe I was going to say maybe many in our legislature understand that, but maybe they don't. That's like the point. So but really, I guess electing people that really have that deep conviction.
This is a God created country.
Mm-hmm.
There's no doubt in my mind about it. That's the reason that everything moved so quickly in the direction of freedom. Man's agency is number one in any kind of organized activity. If we don't have that agency, if we don't have that freedom to either do good or bad or move left or right, then we just don't have what America has to offer.
Exactly. I think that as we have the agency to act on the power that God has given us,
right.
And being a family that recognizes the inalienable rights that God has given us is a very powerful thing.
Yeah.
And so I think that's a great way to kind of land the plane on the discussion today.
Let's do that.
Is there anything else you'd like to chat about before we kind of do that? Because it's a good note, but I want to make sure that we talk about all of the issues here. Is there anything else on your mind, Don?
I think both the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution of the United States are inspired documents. That they were written by men who were both God-fearing and who wanted to create a government in which there was freedom for every citizen to pursue his life according to his desires. That would be my concluding remark.
Excellent. Don, thank you so much for your time. I've really looked forward to our I've been looking forward to our discussion for a long time. And today was the day, so I really appreciate you. You guys have been wonderful hosts and friends of the podcast. So
thank you.
Again, I think that the service you've had toward our country is very honorable, and we really appreciate all the service you've given to our nation.
I appreciate that.
You're welcome. Thank you so much. It's been on our honor. So thank you so much, guys. We have some new announcements coming down with Under God Project. There'll be new ways to interact with the store, etc. Pay attention for new things. But Don, appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Appreciate your